Hi, I'm Owen. I'm a researcher working on questions of what things people can do today that might be helpful for trying to ensure that humanity has a long and flourishing future. And I also spend quite a lot of my time mentoring junior researchers, and I want to talk about what even is research and how does it help anything. And I think this is kind of an obvious question, like everyone knows what research is. But when I try and pin it down, it's surprisingly slippery. And I think that having given this attention over the last 10 years has helped me to make sure that my research is better targeted, and it's also seemed helpful when I'm giving advice to other people. So I think that the central challenge of trying to help the future is this epistemic one. It's just really hard to know how anything is going to turn out. We kind of know what's going on in the past, but 20 years from now, very, very hard to say. And that means that we can't just judge actions in terms of their long-term consequences, like their really long-term consequences. We have to make do with some kind of visible proxies, that's things we could aim for that are close enough that we can actually make reasonable predictions about them, or other heuristics about action, by which I mean rules of thumb that aren't just about choosing goals to aim for. And I think that, therefore, if we want people to be making better decisions about things that might help, that's going to involve one or more of helping to find better proxies, helping to find better heuristics, or lengthening the foresight horizon, helping people to make better predictions a bit further into the future so that they can aim at proxies which are somewhat further out, or that they can have better predictions about that. And all of these are questions about understanding things, and so research feels like it's a natural category. Okay, now I'm going to give a cartoon of the research process. So you start by thinking deeply about some issue to really get an understanding of it. Then you write things down, and then sometime later somebody is facing a decision situation, and you hope that they remember your research, either reading a version of it or someone else telling them something about it, and as a result they choose a better outcome rather than a worse outcome. And I think there's a lot we can look at in this picture, and I'm going to want to dig further both into how things go from being written down to the later being helpful, and also about this first stage, how things go from ideas in your head to what's written down. And the idea really is that if you understand the purpose that you're building towards better, it's more likely that you're going to be able to make good local decisions at whatever stage you're at. I want to divert into a little metaphor for a bit now. So I think that research is typically additive to knowledge. It builds on past work and it provides a base for future work. This makes me think of research contributions as like bricks. They sit on top of other things and they allow more things to sit on top of them. I don't mean that they're all the same. It's totally fine to have differently sized or shaped pieces, but we do want them to be able to assemble into something which is greater than the sum of their parts. And I think that this means that having good interfaces matters. We don't want research where it's hard for another piece to know which parts of it that they can trust, and thereby to build up. And I think that within academia, we have these institutions of academic disciplines which have built up vast castles of knowledge, and this includes the theoretically grounded subjects building their ivory towers in mathematics, etc. Also includes these experimentally grounded subjects where, as well as resting work on previous bricks, people can go back and check the ground truth of things by doing experiments and verifying how that comes out. And I think it's both of these types of discipline have good mechanisms for ultimately establishing, well, what is the truth of the matter here, and that makes it easier for them to have this work building on other work and to produce really impressive and useful knowledge. If we're looking, however, at fields like trying to understand the long-term future or existential risks, we don't have direct observations of these. And so they're not something that we can just understand totally from first principles like mathematics, but we also don't have this experimental grounding. And our feedback loops are kind of lousy. We can't go and run 1,000 copies of the world forward and find out in how many of them humanity goes extinct with these variables versus these other variables. So, stretching the metaphor a little, I'd think of this perhaps as being more like a tiered cake, which is not the building material with the greatest structural integrity. And so I think it becomes particularly important to do things to help that out. When people are literally building tiered cakes, they put these supports in through the layers to stop them collapsing. And I think that we can try and do the equivalent of that, and that it's particularly important to provide provenance of claims you're making, and to go a little way above and beyond to dig into the sources that they're relying on, and to try and convey to readers of your research how well or not well supported the various claims that you're making are, in a way that can help your readers have greater trust in your work, and mean that if they're trying to build on top of it, they have a better sense of exactly what is or isn't solid. There are a number of other fields which presumably have similar challenges. I'm not an expert in any of these fields, but I'm just pointing to the fact that I think humanity does sometimes successfully wrestle with this type of epistemic challenge. Okay, so now I've set up the castle metaphor, I want to put it to work understanding how research relates to decisions that people make. So, imagine that decisions come along as an exogenous force. They're not parts of the castles that we're building, they just appear, maybe as these gaping holes in the sky as I've drawn it here. And we'd like to be close to those to in order to give good answers. And sometimes if we're lucky, it might be that they appear right in one of the castles that we've built, and our existing body of knowledge just tells us exactly the right way of going about it. But often that isn't the case, that these are representing real-world decisions which are messier and perhaps different than the clean versions of things that we've built up a really solid understanding of in our castles. And so I think that we want to build research which is sometimes we want to build research which is aimed at being useful to decision makers, rather than just necessarily providing a good foundation for future work. And in this picture, the blue scaffolding gets you up in the vicinity of the decision being faced, but is rather less solid than the castles. And then the wobbly purple platform at the end isn't really useful for anything else except this particular decision, but so these different types of structure represent different parts of research in the ecosystem. I think that the castles are often done in kind of like foundational academic disciplines. The blue scaffolding is more like the type of work that think tanks might do, and the wobbly purple platform is more like research that is done, mostly secondary research, aimed very specifically at one decision at the end. And then I think it's really good for people to be aware of what role in the ecosystem their work is playing, and to try and better target it as a result. So I just want to briefly look at like what type of decisions am I even talking about. So say for global catastrophic risks, what decisions does anyone make which impact the risks, impact how likely these risks are to occur, or impact how bad they might be. And I think an obvious category is policy choices. Could be by governments, could be at the international level, or by particular organisations. I think that sometimes the public has relevant choices to make. Sometimes this is about where to offer political support, which can then indirectly feed back into policy choices. Sometimes it might be about consumption choices. There's a question about exactly how effective those are for different issues, but it is something which the public does at scale. And maybe in some cases there might be other actions as well. I think that some individuals might be able to make much more relevant actions, take much more relevant actions than others. And so particularly if we find people who are in particularly high leverage situations, maybe they are the key decision maker in a government or an industry firm when something is happening that could cause a catastrophe. I think that also the decisions that people make that just influence a bunch of other stuff can matter. So, for instance, if people are making career choices about what do I go and work on, and if they're doing that with an eye to, how can I help with things, maybe better decisions there could really matter. And so that's one of the types of decisions we might be interested in. And then further research is another big category. If research helps anything, which is like, I guess, one of the suppositions I've made for this talk, then presumably there'll be points in the future where research can help things. And if that can make better decisions rather than worse, then we could get somewhere better, and that could both affect like what people work on, and how they go about it, and how they communicate it further. Now, this is not anything like an ultimate taxonomy. This is just me trying to say, look, here's a way of breaking it down that makes some sense to me, and maybe gives you a starting point for thinking about this. Okay, now we're going to step back to looking at some of the internals of research. So I think there's a kind of common conception that research is about answering questions, and that's definitely important. But where do the questions come from? My view is that there's kind of a cycle which is present at the heart of research processes. In terms of how much I think it's helped my personal understanding of research and my ability to usefully advise others, I kind of think that this diagram is the most important one in this talk. So this cycle starts with paying attention to important things. Maybe you notice that human extinction would be a really big deal. And from there, you move to formulating crisp questions about things that matter. You can ask what things would cause human extinction, or what things would be comparably big deals to human extinction. And then you move from there to trying to answer the questions. And then both the questions and the answers can feed back into your sense of what's important. And this cycle plays out at different scales. This can happen within the mind or workflow of one individual researcher, but it can also happen at the scale of an organisation or across an entire research field. And then there are two further steps beyond this cycle. There's distillation, which is taking ideas and boiling them down to their heart, their most important aspects, making sure that they're really solid. And dissemination is the sharing the ideas for others, writing them up really clearly, publishing them as papers, giving talks. Distillation, I think, is a multiplier on the value of dissemination. When you've got a really good version of something, it's more likely that the audience will get a lot out of that. And I've drawn these as outside of the cycle, but then if we're looking at different versions of scale of this, it might be part of the cycle at a different scale. So the distillation and dissemination that an individual researcher does in writing papers might be one of these blue arrows, like part of one of the blue arrows when conceived of at the scale of research across the entire field. And then a crucial point is that I don't think every bit of work needs to do all of these stages. I don't think that they all need to happen as part of one project, and I think some people provide a lot of value as researchers while not being good at all of these. I've worked with people who I think are excellent at paying attention to important things and formulating questions, but kind of lousy at distillation. I think that some bits of work is mostly about distillation and dissemination of some ideas of paying attention to important things. I think The Precipice by my colleague Toby Ord is of that type. It does have some answering questions and formulating crisp questions in there, but that isn't the heart of it. On the other hand, some people are like really natural distillers, or some people like to be given a question and then run at answering this. So we should try and find out what works well for us as individuals. Okay, what kind of work is relevant for existential risk? So this is looking at a slightly different way of slicing up the space of possible valuable research. I think you can think of this as first there's understanding problems, then understanding possible solutions, and then producing guidance for action in response to that. And can also look at carving this up by methods that we might look at for addressing these type of questions. And there's the challenge here is how do you get traction on any parts of this, given that we can't just go and study existential risks in the wild. I think sometimes we get somewhere by trying to survey what's known and look at disciplines which provide information which is directly relevant to whatever we're trying to understand. I think sometimes we get here by trying to build models and draw conclusions from those models and understand what the strengths and weaknesses of the models are. I think sometimes we get somewhere by trying to study analogous situations and draw out the points of analogy and disanalogy and see how strong the conclusions should be as a result. And then finally, another way of carving up here is going to look at what are the different types of value that research can provide. So we have primarily been focusing on the value that research provides to future decision makers, which could be researchers. Like, you can either think of future researchers as a special case of decision makers, or possibly you want to split those out. I think it's also relevant when you're thinking about research projects to think about the value to yourself. And this can both be for your learning, both at the object level, what you learn about the particular subjects that you're looking into, and at the meta level about how to go about doing research and things that you can might be quite transferable to other projects. And I think it can also provide career capital. You can get to know people as part of doing your research, and there could be useful connections that you can pull on in the future. And you can also get the signaling benefit. You can demonstrate, hey, look, I did this thing, it was good in these ways, and then that can make it easier for people who don't know you to assess, oh, you have this kind of competency, and maybe that means that you get invited to things, or it helps you to get a job, or something. So I think that all of these sources of value are kind of legit, and my general advice would be not to optimize too hard for any one of these, but to keep all of them in mind. I do think that sometimes for a particular piece or a particular project, it can make sense to really just focus on one of these. But holistically, I think that people should typically care about all of these, and if they end up too heavily in the mode of just caring about one, it can they might be leaving value on the table. I think maybe that is least likely to be a failure mode if they're just focusing on the ultimate value to decision makers, and that's not because I think that's always the most important. I think often it is important, and that this is like ultimately why we care about research, but it's because in the pursuit of that, because you are then attending to, if that's the thing that you're paying attention to, you're attending to where the ultimate value of the research is coming from. And I think that can help to make the decisions that you make along the way pretty relevant. I think that if you're really paying attention to that and you're trying to have an impact, then that can be good for your learning, and it can mean that the things that you focus on are things which are ultimately pretty relevant, and so you can get this other one along the way, and maybe also helps signal that you're the type of person who really focuses on what matters, and that's a good property. Okay, so concluding, I guess I've shared various perspectives on what research is, what it's trying to do, how to go about it, and I'm sure that there are a bunch of flaws in what I'm saying, or just alternate, perhaps better ways to look at this, to frame and understand it. And so I don't want people to take this too heavily at face value. But I really do want to invite you to give attention to these questions. And I think that you can then let that guide the work you end up doing. And I think that people who spend attention on these questions of, okay, well, why does this matter? How does it help? Often systematically end up doing more relevant things, doing things which matter more and help more. And I think that people tend to do better work when they understand the context their work fits in, even if someone else is giving them the work and saying, here's a task. And so my hope with this talk is really that I'll inspire thinking from people watching it, people like you, about what's important and about how to find niches which fit you well, whether that's within research or somewhere else. And that thinking will be helpful in guiding decisions that you go on to take. So thanks for watching, and good luck wrestling with hard questions about what to do.